What up, ref leaders? Welcome back to my channel. Today, Wednesday, I want to talk to you about the Guyanese economy. I've been showing you recently some of the developments in Guyana, in and around the city and outside of the city, and I want to give some context to some of these projects that are ongoing. I also want to draw your attention or remind you that we in Guyana are also paying attention to what's happening globally and in the rest of the world with the collapsing banks, UBS buying Credit Suisse, two banks in the US collapsing on the west coast and on the east coast, and what that means for the Guyana dollar and the strength of the economy. So I'm going to address those issues in this video, as well as introduce you to one new company that I started recently. It's called Olivia's Corner. It's a confectionery store where we deliver wine and cheese and chocolates and snacks to your door. If you go online and order, I will leave the link to that company in the description below. So what about the context of Guyana's economic growth? Now, Guyana's economic growth recently has been driven, or is being driven, by the oil and gas industry because of the discovery of oil by ExxonMobil. So to give you the context here, because a lot of people are still confused about what that means, is that ExxonMobil is a US company, and Exxon and Hess put together 75% of the money to fund the exploration costs, and the rest of the money, 25%, came from China's CNOOC, that is the China National Offshore Oil Company. So 75% of the money comes from the US and 25% of the money comes from China. So it's a joint deal, right? The ExxonMobil oil and gas industry in Guyana, lead industry in Guyana, is actually a joint deal between the US and China in Guyana. And a lot of people lose sight of that because a lot of people think that Chinese are here only because they want to sell their products and they want to build out their economy and extend the sales of cheap Chinese products in the third world. But it's important to bear in mind, to keep this balance in mind, that 25% of the oil and gas industry in Guyana is actually owned by the Chinese, and 75% of it is owned by the US. So when you think about what the US and what China are doing in South America and in Guyana in particular, you want to keep this in mind. The Chinese are here. They're building the bridge, right? So a lot of the developments I've been showing you around the Georgetown area are local and being funded by the Guyana government. For example, the seawall project to beautify the Kingston seawall, that is funded by the taxpayers. But the building of the Pegasus Hotel, right? The new Pegasus Hotel Convention Center, that was built with private funds led by a major owner of the Pegasus, Mr. Badal. So some of the projects are funded by private investment. The banks, for example, Citizens Bank is owned by the Clifford Reese Group, and Demerara Bank, those new buildings on the back road that I showed you in yesterday's video, Demerara Bank is majorly owned by the private investor. His name slips me right now. I'll get back to it in a sec. But the point is that a lot of these developments, a lot of the buildings that are being constructed, are actually being funded by private investors. Some of them foreign investors, like the Pasha Global Resort and 4 Points Resort. These are private investors. The Sheriff Group is funding the development of buildings, hospitals, and so on. Sheriff Group is also a private group of investors. So keep that in mind, that building of major projects, the roads, for example, are being funded by taxpayers. Some of it is money that is borrowed from IDB. And there's a relationship with India as well, which is lending the Guyana government money to buy a new ferry system, to buy and build a new ferry system for the Essequibo commuters. So to keep all of this in mind, you should keep all this in mind when you see the development in Guyana. One is that 75% of the oil and gas industry is owned by the US interests, and 25% of the oil and gas industry is owned by Chinese interests. And a lot of the construction, the major construction projects, for example, infrastructure projects, are being done by China Harbor Engineers, which is a Chinese company. They're going to build a bridge across the Demerara River. I'm going to show you once that bridge starts being constructed. I'm going to show you some of the developments around the construction of the Demerara Harbor, the new Demerara Harbor Bridge, the bridge across the Demerara River. And a lot of the roads are also being constructed by, well, it's government funding the actual surface of roads is being constructed by lots of individual contractors, some of whom are Guyanese, but some of the drainage systems along Sheriff Street, which I showed in some previous videos, that was being done by Chinese companies, right? So it's a conglomerate, it's a combination of a number of interests. So that is something, that is the context in which I'm showing you these developments. Now, the second point is what is happening to the Guyanese dollar. The Guyana dollar seems to remain pretty stable. The exchange rate has remained around between $200 and $215 to one US dollar, and that has not changed in at least 2 years now, at least since the since 2020. But the US dollar has gotten stronger because the US government has been raising interest rates, and as a result of raising interest rates, it's caused some banks in the US to collapse. So, for example, we've seen 2 banks in the US collapse, Signature Bank and was the Silicon Valley Bank. They collapsed because of, in fact, there are 2 major factors there. One is they had a liquidity crisis, people trying to withdraw cash from those banks because of a run on the bank, and on the other hand, because they had invested in bonds, right, long-term bonds that paid but much lower interest rates than the current interest rates, going rate at which bonds are being sold because of the rising interest rate environment which the Federal Reserve has created, right? So when they try to retrieve some of that cash so that they could meet their customers' demands for cash, they had to sell at a loss, and that caused these banks to collapse, the FDIC to take over them, and basically nationalize those banks and to save the depositors from huge losses. So that is what is happening. This is the environment. The question is, what is happening to the Guyana dollar and Guyanese banking in this context? I've made a number of videos about the Guyana banking system, the Guyana dollar. The Guyana dollar has remained stable, and Guyana's sovereign wealth fund, which is held at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, is also pretty much secure, right? So we have about $1.5 billion in our sovereign wealth fund right now. In fact, it's probably grown since the last time I showed a video on the sovereign wealth fund, coming up to the end of this quarter. Next month, when the new quarterly report for Bank of Guyana comes out, I will probably make another video bringing you an update, and I expect the sovereign wealth fund to have somewhere closer to 1.6, 1.7, maybe $1.8 billion. But what's happening to that money? It's actually sitting earning interest. So in the environment of rising interest rates, the interest earned by the sovereign wealth fund should increase, right? So we've been earning a measly $11 million a quarter. It should probably go higher in future quarters because of the higher interest rates. So this is what is happening with banking. Our economy is basically pretty stable and solid because of the stability in the price of oil. The price of oil has remained between $70 and $80 a barrel. Right now it's trading somewhere around $76 a barrel. It was $80 a couple of weeks ago, and it seems to be fluctuating between $75 and $80 a barrel. And because that price has remained pretty high and pretty stable, the Guyana economy and the money coming into the sovereign wealth fund has been pretty consistent and rock solid. So the Guyana economy is stable and is growing at 50% per annum. So this month, or in fact this year, the GDP for Guyana, based mainly on the price of oil and the income from oil and gas industry, will be about $20 billion US. And based on a research that I just did on the debt level in Guyana. Guyana's national debt is about $3.5 billion. We owe 3.5 billion US dollars, but we have an economy that is about $20 billion, which means that our debt to GDP ratio is about 20%, less than 20% of the economy, right? So it's pretty solid, pretty stable compared to, for example, the US, which now is over 100% of its debt to GDP ratio in the US is over 100%, right? They have about $31 trillion in debt, and their economy is somewhere around $25 trillion, depending on how you measure it. And so the US economy is in fact under a lot of scrutiny globally, because since the US dollar is not tied to any assets, right? Since the US dollar is not tied to gold standard anymore, it's basically about the faith in the American people to pay their debts. And all of the arguments in their part in the US House and Senate about raising the debt limit questions the credibility of the US dollar over time, because people are going to begin to lose faith in the US economy if they start defaulting on this $31 trillion in loan. But we don't have that problem in Guyana. In other words, we are a separate economy. We're actually benefiting from the demand for oil and gas in the US and in the rest of the world, and why the US companies go around the world looking for oil to supply oil and gas to the US economy, which really runs on oil and gas. So we're pretty stable, and our growth is likely to remain stable despite all of the turmoil, despite the war in Europe, for example, and all the arguments over oil and gas and what Russian oil and gas being restricted on the global market. So the point I'm making here is that the Guyanese economy is stable. Growth is predicted to continue at 50% per annum. This year, our GDP is going to be 20 billion US dollars, compared to what it was in, say, 2017. It was 3.7 billion in 2017. So the economy has grown by at least 400, 500, 600% since 2017. And right now, the debt to GDP ratio is about 20% or less. So that is the context in which this development is taking place. It's actually quite stable, and we should be a lot more positive about it, right? I see a lot of negative comments about the economy, about Guyana, about the management of the economy. We should be a lot more positive about the outlook for Guyana, because we have a pretty good position. Now, what's to happen going forward is that as the sovereign wealth fund grows to, say, upwards of $3 billion, which I expect it to hit $3 billion by the end of this year, it will be time for us to invest those the cash we have in our sovereign wealth fund in the purchase of assets, so that we can have an asset-backed economy rather than cash sitting in the bank, right? Now, there is already a law passed in Parliament to create a team of investors, right? A number of people have been chosen to sit on this committee of investors to oversee the investment of the sovereign wealth fund. And so later on this year, and perhaps further on into the future, we'll begin to see some of the cash from the sovereign wealth fund move into investments. I think in a previous video I said that by 2024, Guyana's sovereign wealth fund, by the end of next year, the sovereign wealth fund will be about $5 billion US dollars. At that time, we'll be able to afford to buy, say, the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center is valued at about $3.9 billion. So by 2024, Guyana will have enough money to, say, buy the World Trade Center. And as the sovereign wealth fund grows, what will happen is that the team of investors who have been selected to oversee the sovereign wealth fund will begin to make purchases. Some of them real estate assets, some of them investing in companies, basically moving away from cash, holding our money in cash sitting in the Federal Reserve Bank, and putting it into assets, so that we can have an asset-backed economy, the way Norway and some of the other countries, Saudi Arabia, for example, the United Arab Emirates, manage their sovereign wealth fund. So that's what's happening, guys. That's what the context of this development is. And finally, I'm beginning to expand. Like I said, I'm working on 23 companies. I'm beginning to expand those companies now. I have a new company called Olivia's Corner. The whole idea behind it is to bring directly to your door world-class fine confectionery, chocolates and wines and cheese and snacks, right? The idea being that in Guyana we don't yet have free access to things like Cadbury chocolates made in the UK, Godiva or Lindt chocolates. And so what we want to do is to curate and to collect all of these brands and to put them onto one site, which I'm calling Olivia's Corner, so that you can go on that site if you're Guyanese and you can shop online and we'll deliver those items to your door. We're going to extend that service to the rest of the world, to the US and Canada as well. I know that right now you can go on Amazon and buy all these products, but what we're hoping to do is to offer you a much more personalized service with a high-touch customer care, so that you can purchase these items and have your chocolates or your wine delivered to your date. Let's say you're on a date somewhere and you want to salvage this date because it's going badly. You want to, show your date that you actually are sorry for something sad that you said. You can order a box of chocolates, a box of Godiva, or a box of Lindt or Cadbury, and we will deliver it quickly to your date at your site, at the way you're having your date, and help you salvage your situation. So that's the idea behind it, guys, so that you can order chocolates online and get them delivered to your office or to your home any day of the week, all hours of the day, and any brand that is available, right? We're also going to go into deals with the artisan chocolate makers in Europe, for example, or here in Guyana. So a lot of our sweets and our fruits and so on have been dried and packaged and so on. So a lot of that will end up on the site. So if you have dried fruits in Guyana, dried pineapple, dried bananas, dried mango and all that stuff will end up on the site. You'll be able to buy items made in Guyana as well on Olivia's Corner. So that's what's happening here, guys. These are the companies I'm working on. Right now I'm making the websites mobile friendly, so you can go on your cell phone and navigate and use these sites. I've actually updated 4 or 5 of the sites so far. Right now I'm working on Olivia's Corner, but I've already started working on the Georgetown Biomedical University. I've already completed or at least started working on rnbrand.uk, Raffle Nation Brands, right? That's the apparel company. And I'm working on the Lisa Biosciences, which is a bioinformatics company. You can go check it out. I'll put the link to the link for these companies in the description below. I'm also working on that intercontinental charter jet company, which you go on be updated pretty shortly. I'll put the link to all of these companies in the description below. And as I said, we're bringing all of these 23 companies onto the platforms by the end of this year, so that we can begin to not only participate in the growth of the Guyanese economy, but show our talent and create jobs for Guyanese living in Guyana and around the world. So that's what's happening here, guys. If you want to see more content like this, click like and subscribe. Share this video with friends and family around the world. Let people know what's happening here in Georgetown, Guyana. Later!